The story begins with a horrifying truth, like a deep wound driven straight into the heart, one that will forever change the way Emma sees her family. At midnight, just as the clock struck 12:41 a.m., Emma and Richard lay collapsed on the ground at the bottom of a deep abyss, their bodies heavy, broken, bleeding, overwhelmed with pain, in a moment where time itself seemed to stand still. They had been pushed off an 80-meter cliff by their own son, Nicholas, and his wife, Sophia. This was not an accident. No, it was a calculated attack, one Emma and Richard had never imagined would come from the people they trusted most. They lay there without moving, barely breathing, yet still alive. In the suffocating darkness of the chasm, Emma could feel Richard's faint breath. Then his voice rose, fragile like a whisper. "Emma, don't move. Pretend to be dead." In that moment, as the pain nearly tore her body apart, a fear greater than the pain itself consumed her, not because she was about to die, but because of the horrifying truth Richard had just revealed. Nicholas, he killed Lucas. He is no longer our son. The words cut into her mind like a blade, dragging her into a spiral with no escape. Emma tried to recall the happier days, when she and Richard believed their family was unbreakable, a single, unified whole. They had built a peaceful, simple life, where mornings began with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of birds singing outside the window. She was a literature teacher at a small elementary school, while Richard was a carpenter devoted to his craft. They had two sons. Lucas, the eldest, was the light of their home, always laughing, always loving, always protecting his family. And Nicholas, the younger son, whom Emma loved deeply, though he was far quieter and more reserved than Lucas. Their life seemed perfect. Every morning Emma went to teach. Every afternoon Richard returned home with newly cut planks of wood, and they sat together at the dinner table, sharing stories of their day. But when Lucas, the son they had poured all their love into, suddenly did not return home one night, the peace of their family was torn apart. The unanswered calls, the endless hours of anxious waiting, and then when Lucas's body was found at the bottom of a stream gorge, the truth about his death was never fully uncovered. The police called it an accident, said he might have slipped in the dark. Emma never doubted it, because she could not imagine anything worse. Yet after Lucas's death, Nicholas changed. He became more attentive, more caring, and eventually married Sophia, a woman Emma welcomed as a new member of the family. They had children, and everything seemed to return to normal. But Emma began to sense that something was not right. Nicholas always tried to control the family finances, and that planted a doubt in her that she could not shake. 4 years later, when Emma and Richard decided to revise their will, they never expected that the peaceful life they thought would last forever would be shaken by the very son they had raised. Nicholas and Sophia persuaded them to leave all their assets to them, promising they would take care of the parents in their old age. But Emma, with the quiet caution of a mother, began to feel that something dark lay behind those sweet words. One day, after signing the inheritance papers, Emma felt a deep unease. They began to realize that Nicholas and Sophia did not only want the money, they wanted everything that Emma and Richard had built over more than 30 years. Everything they had worked for, everything they had believed in, suddenly turned into a dark game of deception and ambition. And then Emma realized Nicholas did not just want the inheritance. He wanted power, and the lives of Emma and Richard were merely obstacles in his path. When they were pushed off the cliff, Emma knew it was no accident. It was a plot. And she and Richard would have to fight to survive, not only to protect their lives, but to expose the truth they had failed to see before. The fight for survival had begun. Emma, with a clarity and strength she had never recognized in herself, followed Richard's instruction and pretended to be dead. But in that moment, she understood she was no longer just a mother who had been betrayed. She was the only one who could stop her son before it was too late. The story of Emma and Richard would not end at the cliff. It would begin a new journey, where secrets would be revealed and revenge would take shape. When Emma opened her eyes, everything around her seemed shrouded in a thick fog. She felt sharp pains spreading through her entire body, wounds still bleeding, and Richard's cold fingers gripping her hand. The two of them lay in silence in the darkness of the abyss, a place without light, without sound, except for the wind howling through the cracks in the rocks. A pounding headache nearly made her pass out, yet she forced herself to stay conscious as one crucial realization struck her. They were not dead. The picture Emma once believed to be perfect suddenly collapsed. She recalled the peaceful days when their family was whole, when they held hands and faced every challenge together. The warm family meals, the quiet evening walks through their small neighborhood. But ever since Lucas died, everything had begun to change. Emma could never have imagined that loss would become the first piece of a larger image of betrayal, one she could not see until now. The strange signs had started when Nicholas, their younger son, became overly concerned with the family finances. Questions about inheritance, about their assets, and the subtle, layered conversations between Nicholas and Sophia made Emma feel uneasy. At first, she thought it was just natural worry that came with age. But now, lying motionless at the bottom of the abyss, Emma realized that all of it had been pieces of a much larger plan, a plan her own son had been building for a long time. The silence in the chasm stretched endlessly, broken only by the strained breathing of Emma and Richard. Both of them were severely injured, yet they had survived. They still had a chance, but that chance did not come from luck. It came from the will to survive in the face of despair. Emma tightened her grip on Richard's hand, struggling to rise even as the pain made it nearly impossible to move. In that moment, they both understood what they had to do to escape the grasp of Nicholas and Sophia. Somehow, Richard managed to activate his phone and record everything that had happened. If Emma and Richard survived, it would be undeniable evidence. But another thought flashed through Emma's mind. Would they survive? And would Nicholas and Sophia spare them if they knew they were still alive, that they had heard the confession of their crimes? "We can't die here," Richard whispered, his voice filled with determination. Emma looked at her husband, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, yet still strong. She knew that if they did not act now, if they did nothing, they would vanish like ghosts within their own family. Secrets had been buried for too long, and now it was time for them to be exposed. Everything around Emma felt unfamiliar. The abyss they had fallen into was not just a dark place. It was a symbol of an ending, of everything she once believed in. Now they were not only fighting to survive, they were fighting to protect a truth they had failed to see for 15 years. After a few moments of silence, Richard spoke again, his voice weak but steady. "Emma, if we get out of here, we won't be able to go back to our old life. We have to face it, the truth, about Lucas, about Nicholas, about everything." His words cut into Emma's heart. She thought of Lucas, their eldest son, the one she loved beyond measure. Why did he have to die? Why did Nicholas do it? She had no answers, but she knew one thing for certain. Nicholas had killed Lucas, and now he wanted to kill them. If they did not find a way to save themselves, everything would be over. Emma had no time to waste. She looked around, searching for anything that could help them escape. The pain still tore through her body, but she could not stop. A fierce sense of survival and justice ignited within her. She could not let Nicholas get away. They had to do something. They had to survive to prove that what Nicholas had done was wrong, an unforgivable crime. While Nicholas and Sophia believed they had killed Emma and Richard, they began discussing how to cover up their crime. Meanwhile, Emma and Richard held their breath, trying not to make a single sound. The noises from above, the footsteps of Nicholas and Sophia, made the danger feel even closer. But Emma was not afraid, because she knew that as long as they were alive, they still had a chance to expose everything. After a while, when everything fell silent, Emma and Richard slowly began to move, using every ounce of strength to stand. Richard was right. If they did not act now, they would be killed again. The secrets of their family, the betrayal of Nicholas, would never be known if they did not survive. With each weak movement, Emma and Richard slowly crawled toward Richard's phone. It was their only chance to survive and bring justice to Lucas. Even though their injuries made it almost impossible to move, they had done what Nicholas never imagined. They were still alive, and they would fight until the very end to expose the truth. But there was still one thing Emma could not understand. Why had Nicholas done all of this? Why had he destroyed his own family, destroyed everything that she and Richard had built over so many years? The answer had not yet come, but Emma would not stop searching until the truth was fully revealed. In the dim light of early morning, before the first rays of sunlight could reach the mountaintop, Emma and Richard dragged themselves across the slick rocks, their legs aching beyond endurance. Every step felt like a desperate struggle, a battle for survival. Emma clutched her husband's hand tightly, not only out of fear, but because of the one determination still burning within her to survive. They had to live, not just for themselves, but for a reason greater than their own lives. Richard said nothing, only lowering his head slightly, his eyes blurred with pain, yet within him a fierce strength still burned. Never in all those years had he felt such a deep sense of betrayal. Nicholas, his youngest son, the one he had always trusted and raised with care, had become the man who killed his own brother and was now trying to kill both him and Emma. But perhaps what hurt Richard most was the truth that he had failed to see it sooner, that he had allowed his son to sink into darkness without trying to save him. Numbness still covered Emma's body, but within that pain, a new fire rose. Her anger, her grief over losing her eldest son, Lucas, could not outweigh the hatred she now felt toward Nicholas and Sophia. They had believed Emma and Richard would die, that no one could survive that fall, but they were wrong. Both of them were alive, and they would never allow those two to escape their crimes. For the first time in many days, Emma stopped, leaning against a large rock to catch her breath, her eyes closing to focus. Waves of pain kept crashing over her, but she could not allow herself to collapse. Everything ahead was still so far, so uncertain. Could they escape this abyss? And if they did, would they have the strength to face the truth and expose all the crimes Nicholas had committed? Emma and Richard eventually reached a small rock ledge where Richard believed they might find a sliver of hope. Emma looked at the phone in his hand, his trembling fingers still trying to operate it, hoping it had survived the fall. They did not know whether help would arrive in time, but at least they had done everything they could. And in that moment, Emma remembered the peaceful days, the family meals, the hours spent sharing dreams and hopes. All of it now felt like distant memories, like a long dream she could never wake from. "Richard, if we can't save ourselves, at least we can save the children," Emma whispered, her eyes filled with fierce determination. Richard nodded, though deep inside him there was a heavy sorrow. They should have been able to care for and love their grandchildren, but now Nicholas and Sophia had placed them in danger. The innocent children had been dragged into a spiral of ambition and crime. No, they could not let that happen. They had to live, and if possible, they had to protect the children. After a long while, they heard a strange noise coming from behind them. Soft footsteps, but they belonged to no one other than Nicholas and Sophia. They did not yet know that Emma and Richard were still alive, but they soon would. The moment they saw their bodies, the visible wounds, the faint movements, they would realize the truth and continue their pursuit. "Emma, we have to keep going. We have to reach somewhere with help," Richard said firmly, his eyes fixed ahead. Emma nodded, forcing a faint smile even though everything felt uncertain. "We can do this, can't we?" she said, trying to believe her own words. Richard did not answer, but his eyes were filled with trust and determination. Even though their bodies were nearly at their limit, they knew one thing. There was no choice but to keep living. As they dragged themselves forward in exhaustion, a sound broke the silence, soft but enough to make them stop. A voice calling Emma's name echoed from afar. Nicholas. He was close. Emma recognized it instantly, his tone artificial, as if he still did not know his plan had failed. But no, Emma would not allow herself to be deceived again. "Emma? Richard? Are you all right?" Nicholas shouted, yet his voice was cold, lacking any real concern. "We need to call for help. You can't make it home on your own." The two of them remained silent, not responding. But Emma could feel the shift in the air, a sense that something was deeply wrong. Nicholas was playing the role of a devoted son, but Emma knew he was a killer. Nicholas looked at them, his eyes as cold as stone. He began stepping closer, his threatening gaze impossible to hide. "Why aren't you saying anything? You both look exhausted. We need to get you home." He took another step forward. Emma could not endure it any longer. She closed her eyes, gathering every last bit of strength, then suddenly pushed herself up, grabbed the phone from Richard's hand, and dialed a number she knew by heart. They had to live. They would live. And everything Nicholas had done would be brought into the light. As Nicholas's footsteps drew closer, Emma could feel every beat of her heart, each one like a warning. She and Richard stood motionless, barely daring to breathe, afraid that even the slightest movement would expose them. Their bodies felt completely drained, yet survival was no longer a choice. It was a command they had to obey. They could not die. They could not let Nicholas and Sophia escape their crimes. Emma, Richard, how are you? Nicholas's voice rang out, gentle yet laced with something calculating, like a predator waiting for its weakened prey to reveal itself. He was closer now, but Emma and Richard did not move. They could only hear each of his steps echoing in the air. Nicholas stood there, his eyes fixed on the two unmoving bodies, his expression calm in a way that felt entirely unnatural. There was no worry, no remorse. Deep inside, Emma knew he was performing a role he had prepared long ago, but she could not allow him to keep controlling everything. Because he was the one who had killed Lucas, and now he wanted to kill them too. Richard struggled to stand, managing only to lean against a nearby rock. His entire body was exhausted, his wounds unbearable, yet none of it could compare to the pain in his heart. "We cannot die here, Emma," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with fierce determination. "He cannot win." Emma looked at her husband, his eyes filled with both pain and resolve. Yes, they could not die. They could not allow their own son, a murderer, to survive and continue destroying this family. She tightened her grip on Richard's hand, then looked up toward the sky. A strength, a will as unbreakable as steel, ignited within her. They would live, and they would fight until the very end to expose the truth. Nicholas's footsteps came closer, but Emma could not let him know they were alive. If he discovered it, they would have no chance of escape. She glanced at Richard, and he gave a slight nod, as if the two of them had already reached a silent agreement. While Nicholas stood there, pretending to care, Emma suddenly recalled the moments of happiness they once had as a complete family. The meals they shared, the walks they took together when there had only been love and care. But now everything had changed. Nicholas was no longer her son. He was a traitor, a monster who had killed his own brother and was now trying to kill his parents. Rage and grief surged within her, but there was no time to dwell on it. She knew that if they did not act now, there would be no second chance. "We will not let him kill us again," Emma whispered, her eyes burning with unshakable determination. "Not again." She turned to Richard, and he nodded, sharing the same purpose. Their survival was in their own hands, and they had to do everything to protect themselves and the truth. Nicholas's footsteps felt like they were sawing into Emma's mind. He came closer, now only a few steps away. "Mom, Dad, why aren't you saying anything?" he said, his voice still sweet, yet something about it was disturbingly wrong. "I'll take you home. I'll take care of you." The sweetness in his words was nothing more than a mask, a calculated deception. Emma could not listen to it. He wanted to end everything, to end her life and Richard's, to take everything for himself, and she could not allow that to happen. "Richard, do you remember? What do we have to do?" Emma whispered, her voice anxious yet resolute. Richard looked at her deeply, then turned his gaze toward Nicholas. A faint smile appeared on his lips, but it was the smile of a man who had endured too much, a man who had decided he would not let his enemy win. The two of them began to move slowly, carefully, trying not to make a sound. Nicholas still stood there, unaware that everything had already slipped beyond his control. Emma felt the pain surge through her body, but she refused to let it stop her. They had to reach a place where they could find help. They had to survive to reveal the truth, no matter the cost. As they finally made their way out of the most dangerous area, Emma saw a faint light in the distance. It was hope. And just as they believed they were escaping danger, Nicholas lunged forward, grabbed Richard's arm, and yanked him back. "I can't let you survive," he said, his voice dry and filled with hatred. But Richard was no longer the weak man Nicholas once knew. With a powerful shove, he pushed Nicholas away, throwing him off balance. "Remember this, Nicholas," Richard gasped. "We already have everything we need to end this, and in the end, we will be the ones who laugh last." Nicholas fell to the ground, but he did not give up. His cold eyes locked onto them like a wounded beast. and Emma knew this confrontation was not over. But one thing was clear. They had taken an important step forward. They had regained control, and all that remained was the fight for justice. At that moment, Emma felt her own strength more clearly than ever. She was no longer a weak mother, no longer a naive woman who believed blindly in love and sacrifice. She was a fighter, and she would protect her family, no matter the cost. The pain still throbbed through Emma's body, every step twisting her insides like a knot, yet nothing could stop her from moving forward. Her fingers, aching and trembling, tightened around Richard's hand as she felt his breath, the only source of strength left in this abyss. She lifted her eyes to the sky, pale clouds stretching across the blue, mirroring her state of mind, hazy, uncertain, yet still holding a faint glimmer of hope. Emma knew that if they did nothing now, everything they had endured would become meaningless. They had to live. They had to protect the truth. Nicholas's footsteps still echoed through the air, but this time he no longer held the same composure. He was afraid they had survived, afraid his entire plan would collapse. Emma could feel the tension tightening the space around them, like a string pulled to its limit. He had no idea they had been preparing for this all along, and now he had stepped too far into a game he could no longer escape. "If you don't do anything, I'll have to leave," Nicholas shouted, his voice laced with false concern. "What else do you want? You can't survive." Emma and Richard did not respond. They knew he was trying to make them give up hope, but they could not let that happen. They both understood one thing. They had no choice but to fight, not just to survive, but to expose the truth, to make sure Nicholas and Sophia did not win. They could not allow him to continue his path of murder, even if he was their son. The numbness from the pain spread deeper, but in every cell of her body, Emma knew she had to stay conscious. She could not collapse. All she needed was to wait for an opportunity, a single moment when everything, every suspicion, every lie Nicholas and Sophia had created could be turned into truth. She had the evidence, and she could not afford to lose the chance to reveal it. "Richard, can you hear me?" Emma whispered. Richard turned to her, his eyes filled with determination, though heavy with exhaustion. Emma knew he was pushing himself to his limit. They were both drained, yet life had not left them. They still had a chance, and they had to take it. "Emma," Richard said softly, his voice catching, "if we can't get out of here, at least we will leave evidence. We won't let them kill anyone else." Emma nodded, a fierce resolve rising within her. She looked toward Nicholas, who still stood there, his cold gaze empty of emotion. But this time, he no longer controlled the situation. His words had become meaningless noise. "You can't survive, just give up," Nicholas continued, but the urgency in his voice revealed the fear he could not hide. He knew things were slipping away from him. He had never expected his plan to fail. Emma and Richard were alive, and that was the moment they began to take back control. In the moments that followed, Emma and Richard said nothing more, continuing to move in silence, each step growing harder than the last. But they knew they could not stop. In the distance, the sky slowly turned gray, cold winds sweeping through like a signal of a final confrontation. Emma no longer thought of the past, no longer remembered the peaceful days. All she could think about now was survival. How to survive. As they drew closer to a place where they might call for help, a sudden loud noise echoed from behind them, something unnatural, as if something had fallen. Emma and Richard turned back, but saw no one, only the wind slicing through the rocks, making the air heavier and more tense than ever. "If you don't move, I'll have to act," Nicholas suddenly shouted, his voice cutting through the cold emptiness. Both Emma and Richard knew he had completely lost control. The calm mask was gone, replaced by panic and madness. Emma felt it clearly. In that moment, she realized Nicholas was no longer her son. He was something else, someone without conscience, someone willing to kill his own parents for ambition. He had killed Lucas, and now he wanted to kill them. But this time, Emma was no longer a weak mother. She met Richard's eyes, and he looked back at her with the same unwavering resolve. They were ready. No fear, no hesitation. They would not let Nicholas and Sophia escape their crimes. In a brief moment, Emma quickly grabbed Richard's phone and dialed a number. She did not know if she had enough time to send a signal for help, but she knew she could not allow Nicholas and Sophia to keep controlling everything. They had gone too far, and now Emma and Richard would not let them get away. In the moments that followed, every step, every movement became a fight for survival. They had no choice but to keep going. Dark clouds gathered overhead, like a warning of the danger closing in. But inside Emma, her resolve was unshaken. They would survive. They would bring justice for Lucas and for themselves. No matter what came next, Emma and Richard were no longer puppets in Nicholas's hands. They would fight until the very end, for the truth and for their own lives. Every step Emma and Richard took felt like relentless effort, a final resistance against complete collapse. The pain kept striking, but they could not stop. Each step, no matter how slow, was a small victory. The wounds on their bodies served as constant reminders that survival was not easy, yet their resilience had become their only driving force. As they dragged themselves across sharp rocks, the wind whistling through the crevices sounded like a warning. The air around them was cold and heavy, as if death itself was circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. But no, Emma could not allow herself and Richard to fall into despair. With every passing second, she understood more clearly that only by surviving, only by facing the truth, could they win. Lucas's death had haunted her for years, but now it was no longer just endless pain. It had become a force pushing her forward, forcing her to fight. Day by day, hour by hour, she realized that Nicholas's betrayal was not just the end of a family, it was the beginning of a battle to reclaim justice. That betrayal was so deep it was beyond imagination, but now she had the chance to make him pay for everything he had done. So even though her body was exhausted, even though there were moments when Emma wanted to give up, she kept going. She looked at Richard, whose eyes held the same unbreakable strength. Together they had endured so much, but never like this. They had lived through peaceful years, but now their lives had become a fight, a life or death battle they could not walk away from. They had to stand for everything they had lost and for their own survival. Nicholas's footsteps still echoed behind them. He was no longer as composed as before. Now he was not just a monster driven by ambition, but a man about to face the consequences of his crimes. He had once believed he could remove Emma and Richard from his life like useless objects, but now that they were still alive, he had to face the truth, that he could not control everything. "If you don't cooperate, things will only get worse," Nicholas shouted, his voice strained with tension. "You only have one path left. Follow me." He paused for a moment, his cold eyes still fixed on them. "Do you really think you can win? Everything has gone too far." Emma did not answer. She simply looked into his eyes, her gaze filled with cold fury. He did not know that she and Richard had overcome countless trials in their lives, and they would not be defeated by his manipulative words. She was no longer just a mother. She was a fighter, fighting not only for herself, but for her innocent grandchildren. "There is no turning back," Richard said, his voice still weak but firm. "We will not let Nicholas continue doing what he wants." Emma looked at him, and in his eyes, she saw the unity, the determination they had built over so many years. Her hand tightened around his like a promise. They would not give up, not in this moment, not when the truth was waiting to be revealed. They kept moving, step by step. There was no other path. Everything around them was blurred and uncertain. But one thing Emma knew for sure: if they survived, if they escaped the pursuit of Nicholas and Sophia, they would expose everything. The truth would not remain buried forever. Suddenly, a sound came from behind, a snapping branch, footsteps approaching. They turned around, but this time it was not Nicholas, it was a stranger. Emma and Richard both froze. This could not be a coincidence. They both knew that any presence here could mean either salvation or death. I came to help," a voice spoke, gentle but filled with concern. The stranger stepped out of the darkness, hands raised as if to protect them. "I am a doctor. I heard what happened. I know you are not the enemy. You have to leave this place." Emma and Richard stood still, unsure of what to do. It was too sudden. She had never imagined that in a situation like this, someone would come to help them. But at the same time, she could not trust anyone so easily. Suspicion still lingered within her. Yet in the end, she made a decision. This was the only chance they had. "Follow me," the stranger said, and this time, Emma did not hesitate. Together, they quietly moved away from the danger, running while feeling that each step could be their last. As they moved forward, Emma could not help but look back. She did not know who the stranger was, but she felt something shift within her. Perhaps no matter how cruel life could be, there were still good people willing to stand up and help others. And perhaps it was because of people like that the truth would finally come to light, and Nicholas, the man who had done so many terrible things, would not escape punishment. As they left the dangerous area behind, Emma and Richard felt as if they had just escaped a deadly vortex. But that sense of relief did not last long. Even though they were no longer facing Nicholas and Sophia directly, they still could not relax. They both knew the fight was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. Their steps were still slow and exhausted, but no longer filled with despair. They had fought for too long to give up now. Every wound, every ache in their bodies, no matter how severe, could not stand in the way of the one goal that remained in their minds: justice. The stranger led them along narrow paths through a sparse forest, avoiding areas where they could easily be discovered. They did not dare to trust anyone too quickly, but in this situation, they had no other choice. The stranger, a doctor who had overheard their conversation and decided to intervene, seemed to be their only hope at this moment. Emma and Richard both understood that if he truly meant well, then they had no option but to rely on him to survive. As they moved along the trails, the forest stood silent, as if witnessing the heavy footsteps of those fleeing for their lives. Every sound around them echoed in their minds, from the crunch of leaves beneath their feet to Richard's labored breathing. But Emma could not stop. She had to keep going, had to move forward. "We're not going to die here, are we?" Richard spoke, his voice tired yet firm. The question was not meant for Emma, but more like a reminder to himself so he could keep moving. Emma looked into his eyes where she saw exhaustion, but also an unshakable strength. "No," Emma answered, her voice soft but resolute. "We have to live, and when we survive, we will tell the world the truth." Richard nodded and held her hand tighter. They continued walking, and this time, they no longer heard the footsteps of Nicholas and Sophia, Peach Beach, behind them. It seemed they had lost track of Emma and Richard. But inside Emma, the worry did not fade. She knew that even if they escaped today, they would never truly be free unless they exposed the truth about Nicholas. When they reached a remote area where the light grew dim and there were no signs of life around them, the stranger stopped and turned back. "We need to stop here for a moment," he said. "I'll check your injuries." Emma nodded, but inside her, a strange unease rose again. Once more, she could not fully trust anyone. But there was no other choice. If this man turned out to be an enemy, at least they could still try to escape at the first opportunity. As the stranger examined Richard's wounds, Emma sat down, her hands clenched tightly, her gaze fixed into the distance. She could not stop thinking about everything that had happened. Lucas's death remained a deep wound in her heart. She could not forgive Nicholas, could not understand how he could kill his own brother for money. And now he wanted to kill her and Richard, the very people who had loved him all these years. Why? "I probably won't be able to help you for long," the stranger said, pulling Emma out of her thoughts. "You will have to decide your next steps yourselves, but at least I can give you time to prepare." Emma looked into the stranger's eyes, not filled with worry, but with something more complex. She did not know who he was, but she sensed one thing: he was not an enemy. Yet there was something in his gaze that made her uneasy. Richard stood up after the stranger finished tending to his wounds. "We can't wait any longer. Nicholas won't stop. We need to find a way out of here and get somewhere safe," he said, his voice stronger than before. Emma nodded. "We have to act now. We can't keep living like fugitives forever. We need to expose the truth." The stranger looked at them, his expression still calm, as if he had already prepared for everything. "I know a place that can help you," he said. "But before we go, you need to be ready. This won't be easy." His words stirred an even deeper concern within Emma. She did not know where he was leading them, but at least she could believe that he was not a bad person. She could feel sincerity in his actions, even though it did not erase all the doubts in her mind. "We will not give up," Emma said, then turned to Richard, her eyes filled with determination. "We will survive. and we will find a way to bring Nicholas and Sophia down. They will not escape. With a knowing nod, Richard continued following the stranger. Their steps were steadier than ever. The three of them moved deeper into the forest, not knowing what awaited them ahead. But Emma and Richard both understood that this was the final step in their journey. A journey not only to survive, but to reclaim justice for Lucas and to shatter the lies Nicholas had built over so many years. The air around them grew heavier, and the steps of Emma, Richard, and the stranger gradually lost their steadiness. Even though they had escaped the dangerous area, the fear inside them had never faded. Every sound around them made their hearts race faster. The forest seemed to grow darker with each passing moment, as if the shadows themselves were closing in, forcing them to confront nightmares they had never dared to imagine. After a long walk, the stranger stopped and raised his hand, pointing toward a small house hidden in the distance within the darkness. "We're here," he said in a low voice, revealing little emotion. "But before we go in, you need to understand that not everyone inside will help you. Be careful with the people there." Emma looked at the small house tucked away among the trees, surrounded by thick darkness. She could not believe she had come to this place after everything that had happened. Was this truly a safe place, or just another trap set in advance by Nicholas? Even so, she had no other choice. They had to keep going, had to step inside and seek help. "Let's go," Richard said, his voice tired but firm. "We can't keep wandering in this darkness." The three of them moved toward the house, each step feeling as though it stretched for hours. The chaotic thoughts of what might come next made Emma feel as if she were losing control. Their footsteps echoed in the stillness like warning bells. She could not stop thinking about Nicholas, about Sophia, and their dark schemes. They had intended to kill them, and if not for timely intervention, they would have succeeded. But now perhaps they could breathe, if only for a brief moment. When they stepped into the front yard, the stranger said nothing more, only gently knocked on the door. Everything around them seemed to fall into silence. Not a sound, not a breath. The house felt as though it were asleep in the darkness. Emma could feel tension tightening every muscle in her body, as if everything was waiting for a decisive moment. The door opened, and an older man appeared. He looked at them carefully, his sharp eyes filled with suspicion, yet there was also a trace of gentleness, as if he had faced many dangerous situations before. "Come in," he said briefly, then quickly gestured for them to enter. Emma did not hesitate. She and Richard stepped inside after the stranger, the unease rising again within her. When the door closed behind them, they suddenly felt as if everything around them had become safer. The house, though worn down and seemingly abandoned for a long time, gave Emma a strange sense of protection. A fragile sense of peace settled over them. The man said nothing more and led them into a small room. The room was dimly lit, with an old wooden table and faded chairs. The air inside felt cold, yet it did not make them afraid. Instead, it was the only place where they could finally breathe safely after such a tense journey. "Sit," the man gestured. "I'll get you some water. Then I'll help you. But first, I need to know what happened." Emma sat down on the hard wooden chair, her eyes drifting toward a wooden board in the corner of the room. It held no clear answers, yet somehow reflected everything she had gone through. They had lost everything. They had been betrayed, yet now they had a chance to survive. "Please help us," Emma spoke. "We have no other choice. Nicholas and Sophia, they want to kill us." The man was not surprised. He simply nodded, his expression filled with understanding. "I know," he said calmly. "I've heard about them, about that family. People like that do not give up easily, but you cannot keep running forever. You need a plan." Emma remained silent. His words reminded her of the harsh reality they had to face. Yet a small part of her felt a spark of hope. At least they were no longer running blindly. At least now, they could begin to think about confronting Nicholas and Sophia and ending everything once and for all. "We will not run anymore," Richard said, his voice firm. "We will bring the truth into the light. If you can help us, we will do whatever it takes to bring justice for Lucas and for ourselves." The man looked at them, his gaze seeming to understand all the exhaustion and pain they had endured. "You survived. That is what matters," he said. "But you must prepare yourselves. What comes next will not be easy. They will not let you go. Emma looked at Richard, then at the man. She did not know how this battle would end, but one thing was certain: they would not give up. They would not allow Nicholas to cause any more suffering. They would find a way to defeat him and bring the truth into the light. The preparation for the final confrontation had begun. As the older man led them into a small room, Emma felt a strange shift inside her. It was not fear or anxiety, but a faint sense of calm she had not felt in a long time. This moment felt like a preparation before the final battle. She knew that anyone who stepped into this fight, no matter who they were, would not return unchanged. But if they did nothing, they would remain trapped forever in the darkness of betrayal. The room they entered was simple and bare. Old wooden chairs, a thick wooden table placed in the center. The space reminded Emma of simpler days, of quiet evenings when she and Richard sat together, talking about the small dreams they had spent their lives building. But now everything had changed. There were no more peaceful evenings. Now they had to face the horrifying truth about Nicholas and Sophia, and they had to do whatever it took to protect what remained of their family. The stranger did not speak at first. He only gave a slight nod before stepping out of the room. Emma and Richard sat down, their eyes meeting. They had arrived at a place that felt like salvation, yet nothing was certain. Even though it felt safer, they could not lower their guard. The tension between them and the stranger in this small room was unavoidable because they knew they could not fully trust anyone except themselves. "Emma, we cannot keep living like this," Richard said, his voice tired but firm. "Nicholas and Sophia, they don't just want to kill us. They want to destroy everything we have built." Emma nodded quietly. She understood. They had spent so many years believing that family was the safest place in the world. But the truth now was a devastating blow, a betrayal beyond imagination. Nicholas was no longer the son they loved. He had changed, becoming an enemy they could never have imagined. "We have to find a way to face them," Emma said, her voice soft yet resolute. "Everything we've done, everything we believed in, now comes down to one truth: we have to fight." Richard looked at her, a spark of hope flickering in his eyes. Her words were not only a declaration of their will to survive, but a challenge against all the evil Nicholas and Sophia had created. They both understood there was no other path but to face the truth, no matter how brutal it might be. From the darkness of the room, a faint sound broke the silence. The stranger returned, carrying a bag in his hand. He placed it on the table, then sat down across from them. "You need to prepare carefully," he said, his voice low and serious. "I cannot help you forever. What is coming will not be easy. Nicholas and Sophia will never let you go." Emma stared at him, a sense of unease rising again. But she knew this was their last chance. If they did not act now, if they did not bring the truth into the light, everything would be swallowed by darkness, buried under the lies Nicholas and Sophia had built. "We are ready," Richard said, his voice firm like steel. "We have endured enough. We cannot wait any longer." The man nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "Then we begin now. But you need to understand this. No matter how prepared you are, this will only truly end when Nicholas and Sophia are caught. They will not stop until you have nothing left." Emma said nothing, but inside her, determination burned fiercely. She would not let Nicholas and Sophia escape their crimes. They would have to pay, not only for Lucas's death, but for everything they had done to their family. "I will give you all the information I have, but you will have to face them yourselves," the man said, his voice turning dry. "Only when you stand your ground, when you are ready to confront them, can this end." Richard stood up, stretching slightly. "We are not afraid. We have survived so much, and we will not let anyone destroy our family again." His words sounded like a promise. Emma looked at him with love and deep respect. She knew Richard was not someone who could be easily broken, and neither was she. Together, they had overcome so much, and they would overcome this as well. The stranger stood, stepped closer, and handed Emma a small bag. "Take this. Inside are the things you will need. This is your only chance. Do not let it slip away." Emma took the bag, feeling its weight, not because of what was inside, but because of the responsibility it carried. This was their final chance to bring justice to their family, to the innocent children, and to Lucas, who had been taken too soon. She looked at Richard once more, her eyes filled with resolve. "We will do this," Emma whispered, her voice like a vow. Richard nodded, and together, they prepared to step into the final battle. The light slipping through the small window made the dark room hazy, yet it could not ease the tension rising within Emma and Richard. They sat in silence, their eyes deep and distant, as if following the approaching footsteps of fate. Neither of them spoke, yet both understood that nothing could stop them now. Every fear, every pain had been left behind. They were close to their goal, the place where the truth would be revealed and justice would be carried out, no matter the cost. The older man had prepared everything they needed. He did not say much, only offered the necessary guidance before quietly stepping away, leaving Emma and Richard alone with their plans. They could not hesitate any longer. They both knew Nicholas and Sophia would never give up easily, and it would not be easy to expose what they had carefully hidden for so many years. "Richard, we can't do this alone," Emma finally said after a long silence, her voice calm but firm. "We need help. Otherwise, we won't be able to face them." Richard looked at her, his eyes burning with determination. "We will do it, Emma. We've endured enough. Now it's time to stand up." His words ignited something inside her. Emma looked at her husband, feeling his love and quiet strength. They had survived so much together, and now they were stepping forward once more, side by side, toward the final path. No matter what lay ahead, they would not give up. When everything was ready, there was no more time for doubt. Lucas's death, the years spent living in the shadow of betrayal, all of it weighed heavily on them. Yet within that darkness, they had found the strength to rise. They knew that only by facing the truth could they reclaim their lives and free the innocent children from the control of Nicholas and Sophia. "Maybe this will be the last time we face them," Emma said, her voice unwavering. "But no matter what happens, we have to fight, not just for us, but for Lucas, for the truth." Richard looked into her eyes and tightened his grip on her hand. "That's right. They won't be able to kill us again. They have deceived the whole world, and we will expose everything." Each word from Richard felt like a vow carved deep into Emma's mind. Determination surged within her. No one would destroy their family again. No one would force them to live in this darkness forever. They were ready to step into the light. When they stepped out of the small room, the darkness of the forest surrounded them once more, but this time there was no fear. They had everything they needed. They knew Nicholas and Sophia would not give up easily, but they would not let evil escape its crimes. They would face the truth, and no matter the cost, they would see it through. Their steps were stronger now, each one a declaration that they were no longer victims in Nicholas and Sophia's story. Each gust of wind seemed to sweep away the last traces of doubt in Emma's heart. She looked ahead toward what could be the end of a long and haunting chapter, or the beginning of something new for her family. As they moved deeper into a smaller clearing within the forest, the faint lights of an ambulance began to appear in the distance. Distant sounds, the echo of sirens, signaled that help was drawing near. But Emma and Richard knew this was not the moment, not yet. They had to face Nicholas and Sophia first. They could not lose this one and only chance. "They're here," Richard whispered, looking toward the approaching lights. "We're going to do this, Emma. We're going to fight." Emma nodded, tightening her grip on his hand once more, feeling the unbreakable bond between them. Everything they had endured had made them stronger than ever. They were no longer afraid. All the lies Nicholas and Sophia had built would be brought into the light. And whatever the cost, they would not hesitate. They were ready to face the truth, and nothing could stop them. As the rescue team drew closer, they knew everything was ready. But before it could all end, they would face the traitors one last time. They would never allow Nicholas and Sophia to escape their crimes. Thank you for following the intense and emotional journey of Emma and Richard. Their battle was not only a fight for survival, but also a fight to reclaim justice and expose the crimes that had been hidden for so long. They have shown that no matter how difficult life may become, we can always rise and fight for the truth, for what is right. If this story has touched your heart, do not hesitate to share it with your friends and family. Let them know that nothing is impossible when we have faith and determination. Do not forget to like and subscribe so you will not miss upcoming videos. where we will continue bringing you inspiring and captivating stories. And finally, if you have any thoughts or feelings about this story, feel free to leave a comment below the video. We truly look forward to hearing from you. Let us share together and spread meaningful messages.